All right, so we are recording this in the midst of the 2023 Open and thought it would be useful to do a topical podcast on something like open performances, sort of ranking yourself on the leaderboard, especially for athletes who don't necessarily have a goal of performing their best on a specific like workout or series of workouts like the Open, all that stuff, right? So, more specifically, say someone is attempting to qualify for semifinals, they're reasonably confident they're making it through the Open. How much stock should they put into their performance on the Open? Right? The answer isn't zero because like it clearly tells you something about how you stack up compared to your competition on certain kinds of workouts. But also, especially for competitive athletes who like to win things, it can sometimes be a little bit challenging to underperform relative to where you think you should be on something like an open test. But there's all kinds of reasons that your score might not be as good as you think it should be, and it can be counterproductive to get too tied up in that. So there's a few different ways to think about this, and coaching multiple athletes, you see a few different ways that this can go wrong. So we figured it might be useful to talk through our perspective as coaches, what we see as being helpful from paying attention to your position on the leaderboard on things like the various open tests, and things that can be, let's say, counterproductive. That might not be as helpful. So, John, I know you have a recent anecdote about some of this stuff that might be somewhat illuminating. What's the story?
Well, this is going to delight you. This is a real cracker of a story. No, we obviously we don't take the Open as seriously as we used to. When it was Open going to regionals and you had to finish, top 60 or top 40 in your region, there was a lot more emphasis on the Open, and people would repeat workouts. They would be kind of primed to maximize their performance there. With the changes in the season, and you just needing to finish essentially top, let's say 2,000 to 4,000, depending on what region you're in. I know it's probably lower in some of the spots, but there's less emphasis on open performance. And if you're a good athlete who's competed at either the games or semifinals or even quarterfinals to an extent, you kind of have this understanding that I just need to have a solid open performance and then get to the next round, and that's all that's needed. So for our team at Omnia, and for a number of people that I work with remotely, the training has looked kind of normal at this stage. They've not been, taking an easy week before the open workouts. They've not been, obviously not repeating open workouts. And all of their training is geared more towards quarterfinal workouts. For some people, towards semifinal workouts. And it means that coming into open workouts, they're not primed to do their best. So in our gym, for our competitive athletes, I programmed a workout with high volume GHD sit-ups on the Wednesday before the first open workout. So the team we have, they did about 100 GHDs with a weight vest on Wednesday. And then on Friday, they're doing the workout and coming through the toes to bar fine, and then the muscle ups, they're just fried through their core, and they can't hit the sets they would normally hit in that workout. And that's fine. They're still putting up numbers that are more than enough to qualify for the next round. But there has to be that kind of reality check of, this is not your best score that you could get. It's your position on the leaderboard is not necessarily a reflection of your fitness level. And it's always tricky to know what other people are doing, because other people might have the exact same situation where they're training hard and they're not performing as well as they could in the open workouts because they're coming in fatigued, or their total work volume has been high, all these kind of things. So the open is a very tricky thing to gauge your current ability on. If you're trying to measure yourself up to other people who you normally are competitive with through the season, you have no idea what stage each of you are at with your training compared to each other. You have no idea how fresh you are coming into the workout. Some people have done a morning training session and then do the open workout in the afternoon. And it's very hard to know where you stand on these open workouts now. And I think people just need to keep that in mind, that it's your current position on the leaderboard isn't necessarily a reflection of your current ability.
Yeah, John, I think that the idea about volume management during the open is really, really crucial, right? Because like you mentioned a few years ago, when the open really, really, really mattered a lot, as a coach, I was extremely thoughtful and cautious about the volume I was giving people during the week during the open, right? And it was a really hard programming challenge because you're like, okay, we want to assume that you're potentially moving on to the next stage, which we may or may not have enough time to sort of like train for. So, if you are going to regionals a few weeks after the open wraps up, like we need to keep a certain amount of volume of this stuff in, but you're also going to do, 150 chest to bar pull-ups on Friday and 150 chest to bar pull-ups on Monday. So, but we don't know that chest to bar pull-ups are coming this week. So we like need to be really careful with that. And it was this like really difficult programming challenge and like trying to thread the needle on volume management throughout the week. And now that the open like doesn't quote unquote matter as much, I'm like still a little careful with what I give people during the open, just because like they might get some insanely high volume test that comes out, but I'm not actually that worried about it, right? I'm like, if I think you're moving on, like I just am not paying that much attention, and I might give you a lot of stuff that could impact your open performance.
I mean, when people went right from the open to regionals, I think there was a bigger disparity between like the top level games athletes and the rest of the field, because for 5 weeks, you'd basically be wasted training time. You'd be, your Tuesday, Wednesday would maybe be a little bit lighter for your training. You'd hit the workout Friday. Saturday would be like some strategy, maybe some pacing practice. You'd rest Sunday, hit it again on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday is kind of lighter, maybe practicing some movements that haven't come up in the open yet that you're expecting to see. And it's just that cycle for 5 weeks. And you do very little meaningful training in that time. Whereas those top level games athletes, they were good enough that they didn't need to do that through the open. And they could do what most people are doing now with their training and just kind of train through the open as normal. And they would get to regionals and they'd have had this whole 5 week block where no one else was really doing a huge amount of meaningful training, and they were still pushing hard. And I think that's come out of it a little bit now. With the extra stage in there of quarterfinals, people are kind of a little bit more staggered, where the top kind of 5% in the open, they're training as normal. And then at quarterfinals, the top kind of 10%, 20% of the field are training a little bit more normally, but obviously quarterfinals is just going to be 2 or 3 days. It's not this long drawn out process, so it's a little bit easier to prep for. But I think it actually is beneficial overall for the competition to have that extra stage in and to have the open mean less. It allows for a more complete training season.
Yeah, I think because the open used to be 10% of someone's training year, which is like. Is it 10%? Yeah, it would be. Yeah. Got my maths right there.
Yeah, right. 52 weeks. Yeah. 5 weeks. Yeah.
So that's like quite a lot, and you'd people get like sick during the open and stuff like that, and they get super stressed and they come out of it and they're just not very healthy, and then they've got to regenerate a little bit before they can get into prep for later stages. But I think one of the cool things now is that you can actually just use the open to prep someone for quarterfinals. So like with a few of the people I'm working with, where it's like the quarterfinals is that point of the season where they're trying to push as hard as they can, sort of everything sort of like building into that. And the open has been part of that, where it's like, okay, we are going to make you do 2 sort of qualifier style workouts on the Friday and on the Saturday. I'm not necessarily trying to change up people's training weeks too much. And you would use the open as part of that. I've actually even put a couple of people through more of like a simulation style week. I've got someone running through it this week, and I had someone run it through it last week, where there are actually like 5 different tests I've sort of put together, and I've used the open as one of those workouts. But what I will say is that I think as much as the Open is not like, people should not get hung up on where they sit on the leaderboard and all of that business, because I think that's definitely stuff that you don't want to be paying attention to too much, especially if you are confident in making it into that 10%, that top 10%. But I will say that it's important to just understand the stakes of those workouts and use them as training opportunities, and use them as practice opportunities for when you go into quarterfinals. Because I think quarterfinals, as much as it is only a couple of day thing, it's pretty hard on people, because it's not like a competition where you're there for a couple of days and you're hanging out and that's it. You block off your calendar, you're not doing anything for a couple of days before, a couple of days after, or whatever it is. Like, you're still in your gym environment. You're probably going to ask the owner of the gym to be open up at like weird times during the weekend and all this business, and you sort of have to like do all of this logistical shit with uploading scores and videoing. So I think that as much as the open workouts are not something to be too worried about externally, like leaderboard wise, you do have to make sure that you're putting your effort forward. And I think one of the things I've been really looking out for is if people are trying to maximize their performance on these workouts, especially for those individuals who they may just have like a good skill set that carries them through into quarterfinals, and maybe those workouts which are a little bit more sort of demanding on their engine, the sort of lower skilled movements where you're getting just average class members doing pretty good on those workouts, where they may actually struggle a little bit more. It's really about trying to get the best results on those, because something like that is going to come up in quarterfinals, and it's probably going to be a lot nastier than what you would experience in the Open. So I think there's definitely like some things that I'm sort of looking at the moment. There is an importance behind the Open and still putting your best foot forward, but at the same time understanding it's a stepping stone. It's not the final thing. So I think that's one thing to consider, is just don't worry about the leaderboard, but worry about your own sort of putting your best effort forward for each workout.
Yeah, Luke, I like what you're saying there about using the Open as practice. I've had several of my athletes go through the whole rigmarole of filming the workout, stating your name, measuring everything, even though they are doing the workout at an affiliate, right? Just to practice that process, because it's stressful and like bad to do that before a workout where you like get warmed up and are like jacked up, and then you are like, oh, where's the tripod? I don't know, like, oh, where's the tape measure? Oh, like, wait, do we make sure your phone's on airplane? Like all that stuff that kind of takes you out of the headspace of competing. And for a lot of people, the only time they do that is like the time that it actually matters. So using the Open as practice, like for logistical stuff like that, and then practicing competing, and then practicing handling the potential disappointment of where you sit on the leaderboard. I think is all like really, really valuable stuff just to get that competitive experience. But then simultaneously, it's not necessarily helpful to like dwell on it or like obsess over your exact score on a specific workout for all the reasons that we talked about, right? So yeah, getting the experience is important, but the potential like emotional backlash from getting that experience is not always helpful, I think.
I think one of the quite useful things with the Open as well is like, you got some people who are a little bit more precious than others, right? And I think sometimes, like, if they are doing the workouts and they are doing them in, say, like a Friday night light situation, or they're doing it around other people, or they can't train at like the same time that they usually train, I think all of those things are actually quite sort of important to like expose yourself to, because you can't always, like, say for instance you got your training slot at whatever time, 3:30 p.m. till 5:30 p.m. and that's it. Like, you do that every single day and you got your routine down to the point. And this is a situation that we come across a lot in in remote coaching, where it's like people have that routine, they go out and that's it. Like they do the thing. But when you are in a competition, and this is going to happen in quarterfinals, and you can't do that. You can't just do everything at the same time that you want to and have everything set up. You've got to rely on people to judge you. You've got to deal with maybe someone who is not a great judge. You've got to do the workout when someone else is around, and all of this stuff. I think it's quite important because if it's interesting, you do see that like a lot of the really good athletes, the people who are used to competing a lot, they just crack on with it and they just do it. And it's just another thing. And, they get themselves organized. They got a friend who's going to judge them and they make sure they have the sort of same judge every single time. So yeah, like the whole like logistical thing, but I think also just practicing, having like other people around you doing it, or practicing relying on other people, and all of this business. I think it's important to do that, because I think the going to a physical competition is a little bit easier because you just turn up and just do the thing. You just, all right, I've got to be here at this time and this at this time. Whereas when you have to actually organize this type of shit in the gym, it can be difficult.
I think it's also what you're saying about it being easier in live competition. I think knowing that everyone else is in the same boat makes it a little bit easier mentally as well. When you're doing online stuff, you never know what other people are doing. Are they setting up everything as they should be setting it up? Are they,
unless someone
better for a workout
unless someone's just like reposting all the thruster jerks that they see on Instagram and putting the infinite amount of YouTube videos together and calling people out.
Yeah.
And what percentage of people just like did half the shuttle runs? You're like, it's probably, it's not zero. Like it's not 0%. Like, I don't know what it is, but they're out there.
But for live competition, that everyone's kind of in the same situation. They're the same. All the circumstances are the same. The preparations, for the most part, the same for those specific workouts. Maybe they release the workouts ahead of time, but you see them the same time as everyone else and you have the same amount of time to think about it. All of this kind of thing somewhat levels the playing field. And even down to things like equipment. Like people have to deal with bad equipment at their home gyms. The setups where CrossFit gives you this like guideline of how everything needs to be set up, but it's like, well, my rope and my wall ball target are 40 feet across the gym and there's nothing I can do about it. There's different setups where when you go to a competition, everything's going to be the same. Everyone has the same stuff. Everyone has the same standards to hit. Everyone, there is that kind of comfort in a live competition. And we've seen it in the past where people have great open performances and then don't perform at regionals for undisclosed reasons. And we're not here to call people out for cheating, even if they finish last in every event apart from a max snatch at regionals. Like that's not on us to call that person out. But there's always people that kind of fall down in live competition because they have everything ideally set when they do in gym workouts. Not naming names.
Yeah, right. And I think that's another thing that can impact someone's position on the leaderboard and can impact their like opinion of themselves and their fitness in a way that's, like sort of you're saying, it's not always helpful. I do want to sort of jump back to something that Luke was saying just about the value of practicing competing and trying to use the open as feedback and sort of like skill practice of competing itself. I feel like we potentially talked about this on a podcast episode previously, but there is also like important information in where you sit on open tests, right? Since you do have this like global leaderboard with like, all the caveats that maybe standards aren't being met, you don't know what people have been doing in training the week leading into the open, all that kind of stuff. But, especially for athletes who are pretty confidently making it to quarterfinals, who are, pretty confidently making it to semifinals or like potentially on the bubble for that, especially some of those folks might have like pretty quote unquote bad, especially for them, performances on something like 23.2A, which is like the shuttle run and burpee pull up workout, right? Where that's just kind of like a relatively low skill, grunt work kind of situation, right? And it also includes like a decent amount of shuttle running, which is not something that some CrossFit athletes are like particularly like graceful with, let's say. And they yeah, Luke's doing the kind of like rigid back, just like limbs flailing CrossFit run, right? That's the not a lot of like rotational grace and agility sometimes. But yeah, right. So
maybe they even walked
semifinal
the shuttle runs.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Some athletes who are like consistent semifinals level performers might fall into the sort of like spot on the bell curve of performance where just like a highly conditioned class athlete is going to beat them by like 5 to 10 repetitions on something like that. So they're used to finishing pretty consistently in the top, let's say, 1,000, right, on like almost any CrossFit style open workout. And on something like that, they're like, oh, I'm in like 12,000th place on this workout. Like, what happened? And sort of like we're saying, like that's potentially stressful for them in a way that like isn't productive, but it is also something that might be a useful piece of information for a coach, or like a little bit of a wake up call for that athlete of like, hey, listen, like, you know how we talk about it being important for you to be able to like maintain higher cyclical paces on these kinds of like conditioning pieces. Like this is actually an example of why that matters, right? And like you can get away with it most of the time when you also get to do like a big set of toes to bar or like a heavyish snatch or whatever. But like when I'm telling you that I want you to be able to row at a sub 153 pace in a conditioning workout, like this is why, because you just don't have the capacity to keep that high turnover movement going. And now this is exposed in a situation where you don't get to hide behind like your superior muscle endurance or your superior skill work, when all it is just like shuttle runs and burpee pull-ups. So, the emotional aspect of that I think can be challenging, but in some cases, I think that that's like actually just useful for athletes to kind of get smacked around a little bit on something like that. So they're like, oh yeah, like maybe I should like legitimately work on this.
Yeah, like I think so say for example, like I've got someone who's pretty confident in going to quarters and they are like they push their skill set and they're very skilled and they're quite strong. But there are people who are not, who I work with, who are not going to make it to quarterfinals, who are actually sort of beating them on the conditioning elements. And not to sort of like, try to preach the CrossFit word and all this type of thing, but you are trying to create some form of like holistic performance, something where, you can confidently say you are in the top 10% to sort of move through each part. And it's not like, yeah, if there was no heavy weights or no complex gymnastic skills or no really high volume of this movement or something, then you'd actually be under and you'd be like in the 85th percentile or something like that. And I think that, yeah, you gotta, some people will come away from this season if they made it to quarterfinals and they won't even use the open as data points. And I think it's really important too. And I think it's like, you got to take into consideration everything. Not just how you get there. Cause then like you never know, like quarterfinals could be completely different. You're probably going to see some things which are going to be a little bit heavier and some things which are a ridiculously high volume of certain skills. But you're also probably going to see a lot more, like if you see what's happening in the open with the amount of shuttle runs that people have to do, probably going to see something like that coming up in quarters or something even worse. So yeah, I think it's very important that people use all of these data points and they understand the nature of each phase of testing and what they're trying to do. And yeah, where you sort of fall short, you've got to be like, all right, well, that's where I need to work on it. Because that will also bring up all the other stuff, because no doubt you're probably going to be in a situation where you cannot express your strength, cannot express your skill because you're limited by capacity, and like you weren't able to get far enough in a workout to show off your skills and show off your strengths because you're not fit enough, or you weren't able to hold certain paces or something like that. So I think that's something which is important to consider.
That's what I kind of like about this open workout was just announced 23.3. People liking the fact there's a second heavy barbell in the open and a chance for kind of the stronger people, but it's like, yeah, but we're going to torch your shoulders before you get there. And then strongest people might not even get to touch that last barbell. And I think this open has actually been programmed really well. There's always things you could look at and say, well, this isn't ideal and this could change. And, having a pure strength metric always throws off the numbers a little bit and things like that. But overall, it's not really been suited to one type of athlete. And I think last year was always, I felt like it was very skewed towards the body weight, the engine kind of person. This year, it seems much more well-rounded and there's stuff for everyone to excel and fall down at. So,
yeah, John, I agree with that. I think that one of my consistent criticisms of the open, and like also just frustrations as a coach with the structure of the open testing, especially when it mattered more, was just the volume of like gymnastics movements and the importance of that kind of like gymnastics bottleneck. I think was really, really, I don't know, like overvalued, let's say, right? Where it's just like, sort of like I said before, like these people are doing like 150 chest to bar pull-ups in a workout twice a week. Like, I just don't think that that's actually that good of a test. And like, yes, people can do it and the best are doing well at it, but this is something that is just like so high volume and really chews people up in a way that I don't think is super, super helpful. And I think you can get at what you're trying to get at without just like needing to keep turning that volume knob up on like how many strict handstand push-ups can you do before you just blow up? How many chest to bar pull-ups can you do before you just blow up, right? And sort of like you're saying, John, like you can actually test your like muscle endurance with that kind of movement by doing something like 23.3, where you're, fatiguing the shoulders through other movements and then seeing if you can still do strict handstand push-ups, which like, yeah, you can argue about whether or not that's a good test of fitness, but I like that way of testing it rather than just like, oh, I don't know, last time we did 75, so like this time let's do 100. Oh, people can still do 100, so let's do 125. Oh, now we're at 150, and it's just like, man, it's like, this is really, really rough on folks. I don't think it's super, super helpful for testing.
I think as well, like one of the difficult things with that, it's like very hard to actually improve people on that as well. It's not like you have to go through, I think everyone focuses on getting strong when they finish competition and all this type of thing, but like building up that functional volume and just the ability to handle that takes a long time, and it takes a lot out of your training, and you can't necessarily you have to be smart with how you approach it, because otherwise people just get beat up as well, and then you're like, all right, well now I've got golfer's elbow and some shoulder issue and this, that, and the other, and now I can't do any giving gymnastics, and I got to let that calm down for a couple of weeks, and that's sort of the sort of criticisms of the sport of CrossFit, and like the repetitive sort of injuries and that type of stuff that people get. Like, it comes from a lot of that, just like very simple, X amount of reps of this, X amount of reps of that, do it for 20 minutes and just, see who can survive. It comes from that type of workout.
Yeah, I agree, Luke. I think that the sort of changing it from like an expression of fitness, or sorry, changing it from like a who can survive to an expression of some sort of fitness, I think is like a really, really good direction for the sport to go. I think that's a much more interesting test, and like much more fun to program and easier on athletes. So yeah, I agree.
Do you think that will be, with just like the change in who's programming it, do you think that will become a lot more apparent? Because I think, I've heard people say that a lot of the programming before, and the sort of like who can survive it definitely came from Mr. Castro's background in the military. And I'm not too sure of what Bosman's background is, but seems to be a little bit more keyed into the, I don't know whether you would call it the methodology or the philosophy of CrossFit.
John, what do you think?
I mean, I think having a change in someone who's programming is good anyway, regardless of their background, because I think it's going to give kind of a different, I guess, insight to the workouts. I think with anything, if you have the same person just doing it over and over again, you're going to fall into repetition, and it's very hard to kind of try new things. I think personally that Boz is going to have a better programming run than Castro in terms of the quality and the balance and things like that. I already saw at the games last year, like the way that new movements were introduced, the kind of variety of tests. I'd say it was probably one of the best programs games. I think Boz was more gymnastic based in his background. But you look at the way that like you progress the testing in CrossFit, and it's, for a while, it was just focused on let's do heavier movements, let's get heavier and heavier. And there was always that feeling that gymnastic skills were maybe kind of capped out in their difficulty level. But I think to advance it, the gymnastics need to get more difficult or varied. The implements need to be more varied, and it doesn't necessarily need to just get heavier and heavier, but the types of weighted movements. So like my favorite last year was that sandbag ladder at the games, because the people who you'd expect to win like a max barbell lift didn't win that event. And it showed a little bit more than just a straight, barbell skill, as opposed to just raw strength. And I think seeing more strongman type stuff at the games is good.
Well, I think
it gives a little more varied to it.
I think the people who did win it, they were like probably going to be people who would win the barbell movement, but all the people around them were definitely different folk. It wasn't like the same, like, 1, 2, 3.
I don't.
So it was what? It was it.
Well, let me pull up the thing. I don't think the winners you'd have expected to win.
It was Spiegel.
It was Guy.
I would expect Spiegel to win.
It was Spiegel and Guy. So.
All right. It wasn't Guy.
It was Guy.
I can tell you that much right now. It was not Guy.
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was. He like did a
like on the winner's side, Jacqueline Dahlstrom finished second, which is kind of something you wouldn't really expect.
John, you just skirting around.
He tied with Nick Matthew. I was thinking it was Nick Matthew.
Yeah.
Do you think?
All right, but you had so Nick Matthew and Guy were tied, right? But you'd expect Guy to have run away if it was a barbell lift. Brent was third, Hopper fourth, Medeiros fifth, like Saxon sixth. You're looking at those people, and outside of Guy, you wouldn't have said they'd have been top 5 in a max out event, right?
Yeah.
And on the women's side, again, Spiegel won. You'd expect that, but Jacqueline Dahlstrom is not a strength athlete.
She is.
You wouldn't expect her to finish that highly on an event.
Yeah. I think,
but I'd like to see kind of if they had like a log max out event at the games, or if they had like an Atlas Stone, like
they should do.
Why am I blanking on what
they should do?
In strongman competition where they have the loading race. Yeah, like things like that, which require, I say, more functional strength, right? And I think strongman trends towards more functional as opposed to barbell strength, which is less functional. I think it just mixes up the field a little bit to see them testing things in different ways, and using different implements to find out what is or who is the fittest. Because CrossFit athletes, we've talked about this before, half of them are not athletic. Like, they're very fit, they're strong, they can be skilled, but a lot of them are not athletic. And you just see them whenever they program like a sprint in the games. And you watch half of those people try and run fast. And it's like, these people aren't athletes. Like, they're very fit and they're very strong, but no one, like, half the group does not have that innate athletic ability. They just work hard.
Do you remember
right?
do you remember the softball throw?
Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Like, it's not to say you have to be good at running or you have to be good at throwing to be an athlete, but you can just watch people when they're given a new skill. Now, this is what I think is, as someone who is athletic, if you throw a new skill at them, they can pick it up in a couple of minutes. So you take those crossover double unders they did at the games last year. It's like the more athletic people can pick those up quickly and kind of get a handle on it. It's like, yeah, it's going to take them a couple of minutes to figure out what to do, but they have the body awareness of knowing how to do things and how to adapt. And the people who aren't athletic, they just can't pick it up. And I think that's what I'd like to see from the programming is things that require people to be more athletic and require them to adapt on the fly and figure movements out and not just rely on having worked hard for a year.
Yeah. What do you make of the criticism that some people make of it though, where like people don't go to the CrossFit Games to watch people, the fittest people on earth per se, trying to figure stuff out.
Look like idiots.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, so for example, let's say you should increase the scope of things and make, rather than making it like, let's just make the bar heavier and let's just make them do more reps on the gymnastics, which seemed to be the thing that was increasing all the time. It's like, okay, let's vary it up, spread the sort of scope of what we're actually testing, do some different strength based stuff. But yeah, maybe some of the stuff where it's like a little bit out there where it's like, okay, half the field can't do this. Is this actually a cool thing to put into it? And I suppose there's always going to be a bit of that. There's always going to be a bit of this, like, okay, new movement in, these are the judging standards. I mean, they're always going to still trying to figure out, right? It's always going to be tweaking. So I suppose like how much of the games you want to be like a finished product that people know exactly what to expect. It's fair, there's no, because to do that, you actually need to run it through competitions and sort of essentially fuck it up and then rehash it and make it better. So I suppose, yeah. What do you think? Do you think making a bunch of people look like they don't know what they're doing is actually like a good spectate? There's the good spectatorship behind it.
To an extent,
yeah.
You don't want to have too much of that, but I think it's always nice as well for people to, like, how many people after watching the games last year then went into their gym and were practicing crossover double unders? And you'd have had some people who are like, oh yeah, I can do this. This is great. And some people who are like, oh yeah, it's a lot harder than it looks. They were actually doing pretty well. Like things like that. I think it's okay as long as it's not a test where you're like, okay, no one can do this. Like the first time they had pegboard at the games and you saw all those people failing, I think that was a good thing. If they'd have done it where it was like, oh, well, the first time we have pegboards at the games and you have to wear a vest and it's legless, and where you get like no one doing it, sure, that's not good. But I think as long as you have multiple, like let's say over half the field is able to do something, and then you have other people that just can't do it, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think there's an element to when you're introducing new movements that's okay, to back up, right? One of the trade-offs with introducing stuff like that is that if someone has done anything like that at all before, they will just like perform so much better. And how much do you want a test to be dictated by like essentially luck in terms of what you've worked on? Right. I think that's like a little bit tricky. And so this idea of like the unknown and the unknowable, I think is like a cool tagline, but I think it's not great for actually testing what you want to test. And I believe Training Think Tank has said something about like, hey, if you're going to introduce new stuff, you should maybe like give a primer ahead of time on what the standards are or something, right? And like that removes the element, John, like you're saying, of like pure skill acquisition, like in the moment under stress. But I do think something that gives folks like an idea of what is expected of them is maybe a good way to balance that trade-off, right? Something like the softball throw, I think is a kind of like a bad example in the sense that like, cool, if you played a sport that involved throwing a ball, like you will win that event. And if you didn't, you'll just do terrible. And even if you knew that that was coming, that would like still be the case. But I think for some of the new skills that you want to introduce, it might make sense to at least give people like a ballpark of what is expected of them so that they're not showing up, like totally unprepared and like looking terrible. Sure, fine, like from a spectator perspective. But then also just I don't like when what I think of as luck, like really, really, really dictates the outcome. It's like, oh, cool. Like I just happened to do this for whatever reason. Like, so I win this event like that. I don't think that's a great test then.
But could you not argue that that's just foresight of either the coach or the athlete in their training?
I mean,
the whole thing of you're preparing for anything. So if someone's prepared for something that comes up and no one else prepared for it, then why shouldn't they deserve to win?
Well, I mean, like usually the case with the crossover double unders, it's like if someone did boxing, before, and they're doing a lot of jump rope. Like I remember as a kid, I did that, and it was like, okay, you do like a lot of crossovers, and you just like mess around and all this type of stuff, and like can I do them in the Metcon? Probably not, but it's like, all right, I know you can do it, and that's just like you said, like that could be just like luck. Could also be the similar to like saying like, hey guys, we're gonna introduce juggling into the games, and then it becomes like all right, who as a kid just like was messing around and learned how to juggle. You can say that that's testing coordination and all that stuff, but there's those, like I don't know, say for example they tried to introduce elements of the like the decathlon or the heptathlon. It's like, okay, well, who threw a javelin as a kid or in high school or something like that? You can just, all right, I just know how to do this. And then it skews the whole thing.
But surely you can say that about anything. You're like, oh, if this athlete was a gymnast as a kid, like they do better in gymnastic events. Like it's the same kind of thing.
But everyone knows
CrossFit has so heavy.
Yeah. I mean, this is. We want to do another podcast on this?
Yeah, I mean this is a pretty big tangent, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I guess to maybe like offer
something back around to what we actually started to talk about.
Sure. Well, okay. So I think in terms of like the new skills being presented in a competitive setting, right? Like if you take the most extreme example, I don't know, maybe this isn't the most extreme, but like you take it to an extreme and you're just like, okay, today's event 3 is like, you're going to shoot 100 free throws, right? Like most people would agree that that's like a stupid, bad test of fitness. And it's really just like, did you play basketball before? Right? Like that's really all you're testing. And so like, that's an extreme version of it. And you're like, okay, that's a bad idea. To what Luke was saying, it's like, okay, maybe some of this stuff is like more specific to like, okay, having a swimming background or like a gymnastics background or whatever. But like people sort of understand at this point that that's part of the sport of CrossFit. And so they've trained for that. And it's not just like, oh, like this person played basketball before, so they win this event. Somewhere in between, which is kind of where my, I don't know, I guess like beliefs lie is like, say you want to introduce crossover double unders. I don't love the idea of being like, this event has this skill that you haven't done before. Good luck. Maybe the once the programming is done for the games and you have the field, you're like, hey, there are going to be some new rope skills at the games this year. Like that seems like a reasonable balance. So then people are like, okay, like I can work on new rope skills. And you don't necessarily need to tell them exactly what they're doing, but they at least sort of understand like ballpark what they should be thinking about. And then that at least removes some of the like, yeah, this person just happened to have a boxing background, right? Or like happened to go to some Buddy Lee seminar. They're just like,
I remember that guy.
Yeah. Right.
Do you remember his
I
ropes?
agree with that premise.
What was that, Sean?
I do not agree with that premise.
All right, fine. Another podcast. We'll save it for,
Do you remember-
we'll save it for another one.
Do you remember 2009 games with the 500 meter row, hammer the spike into a ground 500 meter row?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, fucking A.
Like, they didn't tell people, oh, practice your construction work before the games. No. Turn up, hope that you get a spike that isn't going into concrete.
Yeah.
Hope that you're one of the lucky ones that has it going through just like loose sand. But
Yeah.
like, I don't know, they always do tests where it's like
2000,
sure, it's going to
2009
favor
games.
some people that's out. 2009 games.
Miko Salo.
Yeah.
I
was
want
the-
to say
was
Tommy
the ultimate
Hackenbrook won the
champion.
men's.
No, Tommy
Yeah,
Hackenbrook
I
won
will
that.
Yeah,
say-
something like that.
He won that event, but Miko was the.
He won that event.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Tommy Hackenbrook should have won the 2009 games. He was ahead of Miko going into the last event. And if you watch, they're like side by side in the final event. Tommy's judge is no repping him for stuff, and Miko's doing it exactly the same way and not getting no reps. If they had good judging back then, Tommy would have won the 2009 games.
Yeah, but then we wouldn't have had the CCO
John's a
Loops
Hackenbrook truther.
We wouldn't have the documentary and, all the, we wouldn't have Miko,
It was a conspiracy theory.
No. It's too bad. It's too
You should-
bad.
you should
All right,
remember
on
the
that
first time
note,
they-
let's call
you
it.
should send that. You should send.
Okay.
You should send that to some YouTubers who.
Yeah.
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 Come on. Give them some
I'll see if I
fuel.
can find a
Give
video.
them some fuel. Come on.
Yeah.
I was outraged
Yeah.
at the time.
Find it. Hackenbrook truther.
We should
Love it.
definitely do another podcast on all this because you have
All right.
riled me up, Todd.
Yeah, we'll argue. Great.